airplane and find social media influencer Ape-nonymous, who has brainwashed untold millions around the world, including the biological father of this baby's body I was reincarnated into, because I was thrown out of hell after I died on that island when the fugitive ape army waterboarded me with my own poo. But it's not like I need to tell you any of this. My adventures are linear, memorable, and riveting.
Hello, and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I'm Cameron Reigle.
And on this episode of the Kongversation, we'll be getting into our first impressions after more than a week of playing Clive N Wrench, the new 3D platformer from Dinosaur Bites and Numbskull Games. That is a certified DKU, and maybe DKU for more than one reason, game. Now, Clive N Wrench, let's just address this here at the outset. It's gotten a bit of a controversial reception, in the broader gaming sphere. But DK Vine's review gave it a B. So, who's right? Who's wrong? Well, we'll get into why this game is so divisive, exactly what is the game itself, why it's creating such befuddled reaction, and, why DK Vine might dig it more than, some other outlets. So, we'll be getting into spoiler territory, but just for the first 4 worlds, let's say. I feel like that's a nice, clean sampling. It's talking about relatively early in the game, but not getting too far into some of the surprises in the later worlds. But there are a couple things in this discussion on this episode that if you are planning on getting Clive N Wrench relatively soon, I would definitely hold off listening to this episode, because I think there are some things that are worth experiencing on your own.
Yeah, I would say if you're not on the fence about Clive N Wrench, like you're firmly in the I am going to play this, and you share like similar sensibilities to Hyle and I, there's some stuff you'd best be going in blind for, I would say.
Yeah. So, like, I never like to say, hey, don't listen to our podcast, but I do think that it will be more delightful for you to just experience it without getting spoiled. And I don't know if anybody has already spoiled this game for you. And if they have, then I guess go ahead and listen to this. But I know I was glad that I hadn't been privy to a few things. And honestly, it's nice because I got a review copy, so I got it about a week earlier than a lot of people, so I was able to experience it completely cold, because usually, running DK Vine, being the editor-in-chief and whatnot, I get stuff spoiled for me all the time. You know how slow I play games, Cameron. I have a whole Twitch series about how slow I play games. So, odds are, like, the very day something launches or is updated, I'm getting tagged in it. And so it was nice to kind of be out in front of everybody for once on this. But yeah, so if you are still on the fence about getting Clive N Wrench, then maybe listen to this, because this might push you off the fence into the dirty ground where you belong, and we might convince you to give Clive N Wrench a shot. We're just here to state our own opinions. We're not here to necessarily sway anybody. I know we had Rob Wass on the Kongversation on our season premiere just a few weeks ago, so it might seem like we're biased for Clive N Wrench, but I think we're gonna get into the good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, that's almost a world title, actually. So we're not going to be getting that far into the game, but we're going to get into all of its positive traits and some of the things that might be holding it back in the minds of the reviewers. So we'll get into all of that in just a few minutes. But first, Cameron, I have to do it. I have to plug our brand new merchandise store. Oh yeah, that's right. DK Vine has a shop on TeePublic at long last. And do we have some exciting rare wares for your body. That's right. We got t-shirts right now. DKVine.com/merchandise, or you can just go to TeePublic and search for DKVine. We've got some amazing products right now, Cameron. What's your favorite?
Put me on the spot, Hyle. Why don't you give me the link that I can go to view all of these wonderful shirts?
I just told you how to find it. Cameron has never looked at our merchandise page whatsoever. Here we go, Cameron. There you go. I sent you the link.
My favorite is the Shabunga t-shirt because I get a cut of it.
Spoken like a true capitalist. Yeah. Cameron gets some royalties on the Shabunga shirt. Cameron, I'm sorry to say our Shabunga shirt is not our most popular shirt at the moment.
Oh, it's got to be Have You Seen My Grapes then?
I'm sorry to say to Jeff, that is also not one of our more popular shirts, but we have been selling quite a few Keep Barrel and Carry Kongs and Which Brother Bear is Best shirts. So, cha-ching to Matt Corna for the latter one there. But we'll be having some more offerings on our merchandise store. We're going to be updating it every month or so with some new shirts and other products. So check that out. The best in copyright skirting, inspired by video game merchandise you'll find today. It's dkvine.com/merchandise. But that's not really how we make our money here at DK Vine. No, it's our Patreon. We're at dkvine.com/Patreon. If you enjoy what we do, if you enjoy the dedicated coverage to Donkey Kong and the DKU, Rare and Platonic, then please think about, maybe throwing us a buck or two every month. It helps keep the lights on. It's there when we have catastrophic equipment failure, like my microphone dying the other week. We were able to quickly order a replacement microphone, and the podcast did not miss a beat. So, dkvine.com/Patreon. It's how we make our money. It's how the dream stays alive. Before I'm done shilling, I do want to really quick remind everyone that DK Vine is on some Twitter alternatives. If you are trying to shake the Twitter habit, given the state of affairs over there in Birdland, then we are on Mastodon at, mastodon.sdf.org/@DKVine. There's a reason Mastodon hasn't completely taken off as a full replacement for Twitter, but we're on there. You can also find us at dkvine.com/Mastodon. Makes it a little bit easier. But I try to do all of our Twitter content because I can't quit Twitter yet because everybody's still on Twitter. So I can't just say DK Vine's leaving Twitter. Bye-bye. But I do make sure I cross-post everything that I can, i.e. anything that's not in direct relation to another tweet. And so it's all on Mastodon if you don't want to use Twitter. We're also on Hive, which is a mobile-only app that a lot of people were using, downloading around the same time. And that just search DK Vine on the app because there's no web link. But everything that's on Mastodon also gets cross-posted on Hive unless it's a GIF or GIF because it doesn't allow me to do that. So,
yeah, I'm sad that one's not more put together because of all the not Twitters, I like the Hive as a name best. It seems like the kind of thing that would be an off-brand Twitter in the world of Clive N Wrench.
Yeah, I'm partial to the name Hive because my B in Ukulele and Impossible Lair. Anyway, we are running a contest eventually where if you follow us on Mastodon or Hive or both, you will be entered to win a set of Fan Gamer Googly Eye Pins, Banjo-Kazooie brand. They don't make them anymore. I got a couple of the last ones for sale, and I'll be giving them away eventually once I feel like we've adequately boosted our numbers on Mastodon and Hive. I haven't really set a date for when the contest is going to be over, or the drawing, I guess, the raffle. I don't know. But yeah, we're trying to get more eyes on our Twitter alternatives, and we're giving out eyes in return. So it's ingenious. Mastodon and Hive, check us out. All right, Cameron, you were here with me on that interview with Rob. So we've already been discussing Clive N Wrench on the Kongversation, but now we actually get into our first impressions, what we think about the game. And we've chatted a little bit, in the DK Vine inner circle about our thoughts, but we haven't really gone in depth in an actual discussion, a conversation, if you will. So I'm really looking forward to kicking back and discussing Clive N Wrench with you. First of all, what a wild and weird game this is to not only talk about, but to cover on DK Vine. I don't think we've ever had a game anywhere approaching this, just in how it was made and the scope of it and what it actually is trying to do.
It's very strange to have a game like this. Like, I'm used to, at this point, DK Vine paints with so broad a brush. Like, I've gotten so used to the idea, like, yeah, sure, something is DKU, but this definitely feels like another first for DK Vine, which is weird because it's a 3D platformer. Like, that should just be our bread and butter at this point, but like how it was made, the circumstances of its release, and just really the kind of game it is and how it plays feels very new for the DKU. I'm kind of surprised.
So I did do a review of this game on our website. I went live as soon as the embargo was up on the Friday it came out. And this is actually the very first review on DK Vine in our new review format, which is far different than the review format we used in the late 90s and early 2000s, where we were just basically copying IGN, and we were dipshit kids who were just, saying this is the greatest game ever. If you don't like
now
it,
we're dipshit adults saying this is the best game ever.
No, I feel like this review was very nuanced, but I really get into what makes the game work, what holds it back in some areas, and ultimately I just give it a grade. I don't do this whole breakdown like graphics 5.0, sound, 4.7, but this is all made up nonsense. It's just like, what's the grade? B. I gave it a B. But
yeah, numbered review scores are just, they're kind of a trap because I feel they're judged relative to one another, and you really can't judge games relative to each other based on the scores they receive, because there's just too many variables in like who's reviewing it, when they're reviewing it, what their criteria is.
Yeah.
Or even just considering the amount of time people have to prepare a review in, it makes the internet a less pleasant place.
It does, and everybody just holds up these reviews as like everything is riding on these reviews, right? And not just for the developers.
Hyle, this Zelda game might not make it if it scores any less than a 9.
Well, and that's the joke. That's the sick joke, right? Because if there's anything less than absolute perfection, then it's viewed as a catastrophic failure. We've basically trained ourselves as fans and reviewers and just media consumers that we have such a high threshold now. Like, everybody is a critic. You're either a critic or you're a super fan. And if anything falls short less than, something given on high on stone tablets, then it's trash. And it creates a lot of hand-wringing. And so I was like, I want to bring written reviews back to DK Vine, because we're starting to become a more trusted bit player when it comes to games like Clive and Wrench. Like all credit, like open transparency here, Numbskull Games reached out to me, and I was just like, I was already planning on, reviewing this game and going all in on it, but Numbskull reached out to DK Vine because they recognized, hey, this might actually excite your audience. Like, I don't even think they cared about us classifying it as DKU, right? So, it's like, yeah, I want to bring back reviews of DK Vine. Clive and Wrench is actually the perfect game to test out this new format because it is an indie game. It definitely deserves recognition, and if I could add any valuable insight to it, then I'm happy to do that. My viewpoint on a lot of this has really matured in the last half decade or more, where I recognized games as more than just product for us to consume. They are works of art, and people spend a lot of time making them. And so I'm always very conscientious of that fact.
It helps the more I become an adult and become more aware of what it takes to make a game, to the point where I'm honestly now baffled anybody shipped a finished product prior to like 2006.
Yeah. So, yeah, all that being said, like, I gave it the review. I gave it a B, which I realize, like, and looking into it, like, there are like different grading systems. Like, for movies, I think there's something like Cinema Score or something. A B is considered a mark of death. Only an A is accepted there. So I'm like, no, for me, a B is passing well. It's a good score. So even when you review the stupid numbers, people have a fit.
Yeah, like, I don't want to continue this review discussion too long, but I feel like as time goes on, I've paid less attention to like skipping straight to the bottom and just reading the score, and more like reading the text of the game review. Like, does it have technical problems? Does this have accessibility issues? Does this basically, I feel like generally I have an idea of whether or not I will enjoy the game just based on intuition.
Yeah.
So I just want to know is there some like technical thing that will prevent me from enjoying the game in a way that like my tastes are irrelevant to the discussion.
Right. Yeah. For me, it's all a case of nuance, right? Like,
which is also why I like unscored reviews.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, like, I always try to see the good in something first. Like, I never walk into anything these days ready to trash it. Unless, I don't know, you're having a bad movie night or something, and then that's the whole point. But for me, I try to view the positives first. And if I really don't feel something, then it is what it is. I think the last time, like, I really felt that, where I wanted to enjoy something and I just couldn't, was the most recent Thor movie, Love and Thunder. I loved Ragnarok, right? So I was like so ready for this, and reviews were tepid, but I was like, yeah, I'm not going to let that get me down. I'm sure I will enjoy it. And it just fell completely flat with me, but that's okay. That's okay. It happens. But I tried, I didn't walk into it being like, well, the critics hated it. Oh, this is going to suck.
Yeah, life's too short.
Life's too short, exactly. And I think there's enough problems in the world that we don't need our entertainment to be a constant source of strife in our life. So even if critics hate something and you enjoy it, well, you know what? That's great. Tropical Freeze. Critics hated it when it came out. It famously got a 5 out of 10 from GameSpot. And I think they later amended.
Yeah, I think most level-headed reviews tended to like it.
Yeah. That was the more dramatic review, and I think they even like went back and changed the score after the fact, considering it was a clear hatchet job. Like there was an agenda at work there, but yeah, it's just it didn't stop us from enjoying Tropical Freeze. That just whole like rollout of that game was so exhausting and demoralizing if you were a Donkey Kong fan, but ultimately it didn't stop us from recognizing that Tropical Freeze was a masterpiece. But anyway, I say all of that just to kind of get into Clive N Wrench and needing to understand context. I think context is king here. And because if you're going into
and
this,
also just like where we're coming from this as people, because I think that's genuinely important when looking at any kind of criticism is like nobody is unbiased. And for that reason, I have like with reviews, like I, for instance, know if like Josh from the Geek Critique says there's something to appreciate in a game, I will generally think that there's reason for me to give it a shot because him and I align on a lot of things.
Yeah, exactly. So, as I said in my review, if you're going into Clive N Wrench expecting the next Banjo-Kazooie or Ukulele, you're going to be sorely disappointed because Clive N Wrench, for those who don't know, for those who didn't listen to our interview with Rob Was, it was made in Unity almost entirely by one person, Rob, and it was made over 12 years of effectively homebrewed. And it's a staggering feat that he was able to do this. And, you know, I hear the complaints about the visuals, how it's not as polished as like Ukulele. I think the most egregious comparison was it isn't as good as Super Mario Odyssey. And I'm like,
yeah, Temp, if you have those, that's, I think, higher expectations than were put on Ukulele.
Yeah, no. If you're comparing this game that was, I don't know the circumstances of how Rob developed it, but let's say it was made in his bedroom, because that's more dramatic. A game made in a dude's bedroom compared to Nintendo EPD's big Mario game for the generation. What are we doing here? Why are we making this comparison?
Yeah, there was I mean, we're definitely like alluding to one specific review, but I'll just I just have like two thoughts on that, which is like one, I see a lot of symmetry between how this is received and how Ukulele is received. Mm-hmm. I also think unfair expectations were set for Ukulele.
Yeah. And
needed to be tempered a little bit because, you know, pedigree of who made it aside, it's a 3D indie platformer from a new studio that from announcement to release was like about 2 years in development. And with the circumstances of Clive N Wrench's development, you got to temper those expectations even more than Ukulele.
For sure. And
also just, like, there can be other platformers that exist other than Super Mario Odyssey.
Well, and that's
something doesn't need to be the best in a genre to justify its existence. People can enjoy two cakes.
Yeah, that's the snake chasing its own tail that I was alluding to earlier, where everything has to be the best, better than the last. We can't just have acceptably fun games.
There's only one game I expect to be better than Super Mario Odyssey, and that's Super Mario Odyssey 2.
Yeah, it's ludicrous, right? And I can see the arguments that, well, you know, this is what a $40 Switch game. You know, it needs to be at least worth $40 to Super Mario Odyssey. And, you know, maybe if it was, you know, a free game on Game Pass or something, it would be a different argument. But I think that's all just getting in the weeds of whether or not you can have fun with it, right? And maybe this is us showing our age a little bit because I mean, I know I'm older than you, Cameron. I'm not trying to age you up here to feel better about my own impending Donkey Kong Daddy era, but I think that...
Oh, that's the missing generation, isn't it? You got to be careful.
I think that, like, we recall a time when 3D platformers were so plentiful that, you know, you would have the polished, we'll call them AAA. I don't know if that's the right term for them, but games from Nintendo and Rare, and then you would have the games from third-party studios.
Oh yeah, I mean, in the way that, like, in the era of the NES and the Super Nintendo, 2D platformers was kind of the default genre if, like, you had a licensed property and just needed to put out a game and nobody cares what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that 3D platforming was essentially like that default genre through, like, the later life of the PlayStation N64 and, like, through the GameCube.
Yeah.
And most of the PS2 and Xbox.
Yeah, and we've gotten away from that, you know, the collapse of the 3D platformer genre as the go-to. Like, the genre never completely went away. You still had, you know, Super Mario Galaxy, and then you had the whole slight resurgence in the early 2010s that's only now, like, really seeing the fruits of the labor. Like, Clive N Wrench started in that era. We now finally got it. You know, Ukulele came, and we're still waiting on a sequel to that, but it's not as bountiful as it used to be.
Yeah,
and
I don't feel like the genre ever truly died. It's just, it's no longer the dominant force in the space.
No, and so for me, Clive N Wrench, it delightfully harkens back to when you would try another 3D platformer out that wasn't made by Nintendo or Rare, and you might play it for a weekend or even more, you know, if you like get it for Christmas or a friend gets it and you just play it quite a bit. It reminds me of that, and you actually had a really apt point that doesn't even really apply to my life so much, considering, like, my friend circle, like, they adopted the PlayStation 1 later in its existence. I never had a PlayStation at all, but
this was a perspective that was, like, apparent to me within, I think within minutes of the gameplay, because, I mean, Rob even mentioned this a little bit in our interview with him, but, like, alluded to people kind of taking the wrong impression from of the kind of game Clive N Wrench is. And I think you know, being Donkey Kong Universe oriented fan, see a name like Clive N Wrench, you know, showing off a comedic animal duo, maneuvering around a 3D space, and I think, oh, Banjo-Kazooie, like that. Yeah, with very little time spent in the game at all, I immediately realized the vibe I get from this game is not Banjo-Kazooie. It is more like PlayStation platformers like Spyro the Dragon, as well as, like, various multi-platform releases that, like, generally hit the PlayStation 1 because it just got more releases than the N64, bluntly. But, like, some multi-platform as well. Like, I'm thinking, like, games like Toy Story 2, Muppet Monster Adventure, Gex, that series.
Yeah, like,
which,
obviously,
like, I realize that's not based on an existing property, but you get my meaning.
Yeah, like, I'm not as well versed in the PlayStation library, but I did play Spyro. I actually played Spyro at a friend's house, and the original Crash Bandicoot, but Spyro is the more apt comparison here. And yeah, I got that sense too when I first played Clive N Wrench. I was, you know, there is some aspects of Clive N Wrench that do really feel familiar to me as the DKU diehard, the Rare fan.
Sure. That's not to say the love isn't felt for Banjo in this game. It clearly is, like, all over the place.
Yeah, especially in the way it world builds and maybe presents the environments. But yeah, I mean, I was like, this really does feel like a PS1 game, like something that had been lost for 25 years, and somebody just found this. Hey, here's this PS1 game that nobody has ever played. Let's release it.
Yeah, like what I've been essentially like telling people, or like wanting to tell people at least, about who like don't know what to make of this game when they're seeing the reception to it. And I just say, like, go in. Just go into this game imagining that it's in 240p and the polygons are like wobbling like Jello, and it'll click into place more, I think.
Yeah, the point I brought into my review, because this is really what clicked for me playing the game, like a week before everyone else, before anybody else had a public opinion of it. I was like, this really feels like, because my other big passion aside from the DKU is the Beatles, right? Like, and that whole era of music. And this really feels like a garage band tribute to 3D platformers. And the fact that it, effectively feels like a PlayStation game from 25 years ago, I think is the result of, how far technology has come and what people are capable of doing just on their own. But it does feel like it's this kind of down and dirty, grittier, like just soaked in fuzz guitar kind of jam that is approximating these 3D platformers from the height of the genre. So it is like not as polished as you might expect from a major studio, but the love is abundant. The love just comes through for it, and that is what enchanted me when I was still on the fence about the game myself, when I was like unsure of how I was actually feeling about what I was playing. And then as I kept playing it, I discovered more nuances, and the game itself, well, we'll get into it because I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself here, because Clive N Wrench is a game that I feel like some of the poor reviews out there, they might have stopped after the first world, or they just like threw in the towel early, because Clive N Wrench is a game that gets better and better the deeper you get. And I don't know if it is just a result of, like, during the development process, just getting more confident in what Rob was able to do or what, but each world I was like, I like this world even more than the last. This is feeling great now. And so, yeah, I think that it's a game that is both nostalgic, but the longer you stick with it, the more it feels fresh and contemporary in some ways. I don't know, but like in my opinion, like talking about the contrasting reviews aside, I think one thing for me that's indisputable from the start is that the characters always control and feel pretty great. Like, I never had any issues with controlling Clive N Wrench. I think that once I got the hang of the moveset, then it was always crisp, it was always responsive, and I could always get to where I needed to go if I executed it just right.
Yeah, I think I agree. The only thing I stumbled with a bit right at the start is the specific button mapping that Clive and Wrench work with, because the game is kind of it has a bit of a learning curve to get used to its mechanics if you're expecting it to play like any other platformer. Because I would describe the way Clive controls as kind of a hybrid of Spyro and Mario 64, but also like with the responsiveness that you and flow that you expect from a modern game. So I had to acclimate to things like using an Xbox controller, holding LB to run, double jumping with A but gliding with X, that sort of thing. But now I feel like, just the act of spending time to learn it, I've gotten a lot more comfortable with it, and it doesn't feel like an issue.
So it should be worth pointing out that you're playing with an Xbox controller because you're playing on Steam. It's not available on Xbox, but you have it on Steam, I have it on Switch. So between the two of us, we have a pretty good idea of two of the major formats. It's also available on PlayStations 4 and 5, but we don't have any, between us, we don't have that format for Clive N Wrench, so we can't really speak to that. I've been playing it on my Switch, and I think it feels great with both the joypads and the Pro controller. Once you get the handle on all the little maneuvers, like getting the running start, doing the side jump, a la Super Mario 64.
It's been a while since I've played a game with that side jump.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of fun. I kind of like over rely on it because it just expands your maneuverability so much.
It really does, especially since you don't have to crouch and jump every time you want to get that height. You can just launch into it. But yeah, I think it plays great on the Switch. And I've heard some people say there's some performance issues on Steam. I don't know if that's accurate or not.
So I feel like I haven't run into like glaring performance issues. There might be like a dropped frame here or there in an animation or something, but not enough to like really distract me in a glaring way. I kind of have this is a crackpot theory of mine, and like it may not be 100% accurate to what's actually going on with people. Like, I don't want to say somebody's experiences are invalid because, I'm not in the room over their shoulders seeing the same thing they're seeing. But something I've noticed that the game does that I think might have led to a lot of the complaints and reviews about performance hiccups is there are a fair amount, and I'm sure you've noticed this as well, Hyle, there are a lot of objects in the play field that you can interact with that are just like physics objects that are visual, like flourishing clutter to the level, like, like balls you can roll around or like trash on the floor.
Yeah.
And I've noticed they kind of, they have like, again, they have physics applied to them, but when you can say like, knock into a bottle and like roll it around the ground and shift it here and there, those objects move at like a lower frame rate than anything else around them, kind of like a background character in a Switch game.
Mm-hmm.
But the relative frame rate of the rest of the game is intact. It's not like the entire game is chugging because you tipped a bottle over.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if maybe people are seeing that and thinking, "Oh God, the frame rate nosedived. What's going on?"
Maybe.
I think it's just those objects are hard coded to be like that.
Yeah.
Same with like the ragdolled enemies.
Yeah.
Which I don't know about performance issues. I have had some entertaining visual glitches with the ragdolled enemies.
So have I. That I was just gonna say, like, as far as performance goes, and I think there's a difference between performance issues and maybe visual hiccups here or there.
Sure, one is actively enhancing my enjoyment of the game.
Yeah, I haven't had any performance issues on the Switch. I have to say, like, I feel like it plays pretty great on the Switch. I do want to say, if you have it on the Switch or you're planning on getting it on the Switch, you should definitely play it in docked mode for the first good bit. Get your feet underneath you, really get a feel for it. I think it plays fine in handheld mode, but it doesn't really do it justice. I think a lot of the details that are there, and this is a very detailed game. Like, people might rag on the visuals being rudimentary, but it doesn't mean there isn't a lot of small nuances to everything.
There's definitely a lot of heart in this,
Yes.
I will say. Like, I know that's a nebulous thing to say, but I do feel a lot of Rob's personal taste coming through in this game, just through the density of fun little Easter eggs and jokes and the specific nature of them.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of our favorites or some that stood out to us in just a bit. Really, it's going to be mostly talking about the first world where we do that. But I just want to say, like, I think that if you blow it up on your TV, it's going to really make the game pop and feel more endearing to you, rather than if you shrink it down to handheld size. It's a perfectly fine way to play it, and I prefer to play Switch in handheld mode because I love handheld gaming, and it allows me to, multitask.
And I'm the exact opposite. Like, if you give me the option to play on a big screen over a tiny one in my hands, I'm taking the big screen every time.
Yeah. But I would say, like, give it a couple hours on your TV, because the game will endear itself to you far more the more you can really soak in, and then take it in handheld mode and then go nuts. But yeah, we're talking about the gameplay and interacting with objects and stepping on those ketchup packets and making them go squirt. But the characters, Clive and Wrench, they control great. It feels really satisfying, and I mean, a lot of the fun of the game is just romping around the environments as Clive and Wrench, and I feel like the game wouldn't be as enjoyable as it was if they played clunkier.
Oh, for sure. Like, just the act of, like, flipping them around and wandering around aimlessly is pretty fun.
We're comparing it to kind of like a lost third-party PlayStation game from 25 years ago, but I feel like they control far better than a lot of those games ever did. It feels very contemporary, or it feels at the very least like the quality level you would expect from Rare or Playtonic. Like, they feel tight, they feel just well maneuvered, no issues there. Actual combat with enemies, and enemies are sort of few and far between. Like, there isn't this great abundance of mooks you have to mow down like there is in, say, Ukulele. But there are baddies in every world, and I would say that this is kind of where I had a bit of a learning curve, because the combat is a little floaty. It feels a little bit
I would say, like, my issue with the combat has been, like, it doesn't feel like there's a weight to it.
Yeah.
Like I have a clear attacking state, but you don't feel that sort of, like, push feedback of, say, like, I mean, even though, like, the game does have rumble, just, like that sort of Zelda Wind Waker-y kind of feedback where the game will, like, slow down and heighten the music, and, like, just you feel the impact of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really feel that here, and granted, I think combat might be just a really hard thing to nail down in a 3D platformer that's not combat oriented, because I mean, I had issues with the combat in Demon Turf.
Yeah.
Though they're different issues than what I have here.
Yeah. I think, like, it was the steepest thing for me to get a handle on. Like, I couldn't climb this cliff for the life of me in that first world, where especially you had the baddies, the sprocket robot, the little toy robots.
Yeah, I think we're beating around this bush long enough. There's a lot in the first world that I think starts this game off on the back foot, and those robots being one of the first enemies you'll run into is one of them, because they move very fast and they have a projectile weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, you haven't really been briefed on how to all the tools in your arsenal to bring down an enemy. It's just kind of, I think, the worst thing to have thrown at you at that point in time.
Yeah. So Any baddie that shoots projectiles at you will be your biggest hindrance in this game. You will eventually figure out how to evade. You'll get kind of on the same level with the game, and eventually it's not really a problem. But yeah, the Sprockets or the Macella brothers, the alligators or crocodiles in Third World who fire tomatoes at you.
Yeah, which I love their designs, but they do have that same issue. It's just like the key with those enemies is basically you learn the platforming mechanics enough to maneuver around them for long enough that you can get up in their face and either jump on their heads or punch them.
Yes. So,
but when you're not quite used to the controls yet, and that's thrown at you, well, you're just going to get pelted with a lot of stuff right off the bat.
Yeah, the combat actually reminds me a great deal of Donkey Kong 64. Just a little bit. When you're Donkey Kong, when the game is just starting out and these naughties are in your face, and you're like, it's a bit of a struggle because it's a Donkey Kong game and you're like, I'm going to jump on them, but you can only jump on them in just the right angle. Actually, Clive N Wrench has better combat than Donkey Kong 64 does in some regards because it is far easier to jump on baddies than it was in DK64. So you
also take fewer hits generally.
Yeah.
I guess like Clive's standard attack is very like Crash Bandicoot, very Jak and Daxter, which is swinging wrench in a tornado arc around himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's what you're going to spam initially until you really get the jumping down and you're just like, oh, I'm just going to jump on them. And that's how I took out most of the imps at the very least that would appear throughout the worlds. Because like Yooka-Laylee, Yooka-Laylee had, of course, the corplets that would change their appearance with each world. Clive N Wrench does something similar with the imps. Like, for example, they're going to be in a top hat in the Great Wen, the Victorian world, or they're going to be dressed as mummies in Tempest Tombs, the ancient Egyptian world. So, but they're very easy to jump on. Then you're going to run into an enemy that's a little bit taller, like the Sprockets or the Walrus police constables or whatever they are, and you can jump on them too, or you might just attack them. But, eventually you get the hang of it. But I would say, to your point, that the Sprockets, the toy robots, were definitely probably the worst introduction to combat in this game. And it was just like, oh, I don't know how I feel about this. Eventually it's not a problem, but you have to kind of get better at it.
And fortunately, the game is not that combat oriented.
No.
Like you aren't going to find yourself like locked in a room with 30 enemies swarming you and have to take them all out. That's not the kind of game this is.
A boss fight or two here or there, but
well, sure, but not in the course of normal gameplay.
No. So let's talk about the worlds, Cameron. And like I said, we're only getting into the first 4. So if you've played through these already, but you haven't beaten the game or you haven't gotten, much further than this, then keep listening, because we're not going to spoil anything past World 4. There's no end game here. There's no ultra secret spoilers. We're just talking about the first 4 worlds. So, and we've been beating around this bush, Cameron, and I feel really, really bad to get into this because I know Rob said that Bunny, I Shrunk the Chimp, the first world in the game, was his favorite. And there's a lot I like about it. There really is.
It's the world that I thought for sure was going to be my favorite before I even picked up the game.
I really think a lot of the poor reviews and bad first impressions it's leaving are entirely the result of this world coming first in the lineup. And I'm just like, oh man, like just one world later, the game really opens up and it really shows off exactly what it is. I feel like this world is too atypical it's too just completely off center from the rest of the game that it just doesn't really actually make the appropriate impression that about what Clive N Wrench is all about.
Yeah, and that's not to say that, like, I think, like, less time was spent on it. Like, I think, on the contrary, the sheer density of things in that level, like the references, the thought put into, like, the decor and the room layout, like, I think it was very thought out, and I think that's kind of the problem, because it's got so much more density than kind of anything else in the game I played up to this point, that I don't think it as clearly telegraphs to the player what you should do as seamlessly as other areas of the game.
Yeah, like
I think it kind of paints the. I love all the references and Easter eggs, but I think some people might be walking away with the impression, like, if that's the only thing they see, they might just think, well, okay, this game is more concerned with being this wink and nod showpiece than it is with me being able to tell which edges I can grab.
Right.
And that's not the case.
I think going back to this world after you do play another world or two, once you really get a taste for how the game is structured, and there is a very exquisite structure to this game, but you wouldn't know it from the first world. So I think once you, like, go back into it, you're like, oh yeah, like, I actually do enjoy this world, but you...
There's even some weird things, like going back to it after I've done a bunch of other worlds, and I think about something weird that, like, that never showed up again. Like we already talked about what an awkward intro the Sprocket enemies were. There's another awkward enemy intro in the first level, which is you're given a tutorial tooltip that hey, some enemies might be, like, hidden behind walls where you can't see them, and you have to look for environmental clues to suss them out. And the way the game demonstrates that to you is you have a 90-degree corner that you can't see beyond, and there's a spider web. So, if you walk down that corner and turn to the left, you will be immediately attacked by a spider. And I could see that immediately, you know, raising an eyebrow with somebody of, like, well, that's kind of a cheap shot to the player.
Mm-hmm.
That situation has not come up ever again, where I have felt like you needed to be hyper aware of your surroundings to not get sucker punched. I feel like the game gives you plenty of breathing room around pretty much every other enemy encounter.
Yeah. And again, like, I feel bad because Rob, obviously this world means a great deal to him, and I can see why if this is the first one, you know, he developed for the game, and there's a lot of love in there, and you will feel that love as well. But I feel like if the order had been switched around slightly, if this world came later in the game, then people wouldn't have any issues with it, right? Because the game would be established in people's minds.
Yeah, it's an unenviable place, but because I get, like, because of the premise of the world, it's hard to really put it anywhere else narratively. You kind of either have to do it right at the start or as, like, a victory lap toward the end, probably.
Yeah.
Given that it's a time travel game and this is just it's a present day Honey, I Shrunk the Kids kind of scenario.
Right. And I think that's also part of the problem too, is, like, the game, the heart of the game thematically is the time travel. And that's really what I've been enjoying about it, is as a history buff going into these different eras, some that have never really been represented in the 3D platforming genre, and seeing the way it's just broken down into tropes and, you know, shorthand, both visually and narratively. And, you know,
there was a lot of, like, stuff in the levels that, like, at once feels familiar, but also, like, I can't remember having ever been done before, to the point where it feels bizarre that nobody's done it before.
Yeah. Like, even the ancient Egyptian world, Tempest Tombs, you're like, oh, yeah, everybody's done an ancient Egyptian world from the onset of 2D platforming well into 3D platforming. Super Mario 64 had it. Banjo-Kazooie had it. And yet, Tempest Tombs, they're able to do something new with the idea of ancient Egypt. And it's not just, here's the sand, here's the pyramids. It's actually none of that. It's like a bustling market town. And it feels refreshing and fun. And like I said, like as a history buff who loves 3D platformers and doesn't mind, getting into just the schlocky tropes of what we associate with each era and culture, I've been having a blast with Worlds 2 onwards. Not to say I didn't like a lot about Bunny I Shrunk the Chimp, and especially retrospectively coming back to it after really getting a handle on what the game's about, I like it quite a bit, but it doesn't really tell you what makes Clive N Wrench tick. And I think that's the biggest unfortunate thing with it coming first, and that's really what's scaring off a lot of reviewers who maybe don't have as much time as DK Vine does, because, DK Vine, like, how many games do we review? How many big releases do we have that's worthy of our time saying, like, all right, we're going to sit down and we're going to review this game. But if you're reviewing how many games a week, or if you're not necessarily invested in this genre or this concept and you're just picked to do the review, then, it's going to scare you off. It's going to scare you off. But I feel like Clive N Wrench, the game, it feels like it grows with confidence and skill and polish with each and every single world that I've encountered thus far. And I don't know, like I know some people out there don't like hearing, oh, just stick with it. It gets so much better because, whenever there's a TV show, generally that's what people are going to say. Oh yeah, first season's pretty rough, but stick with it. It gets so much better. You don't like to hear that because you're like, so I'm going to have to sit through like 6.
Yeah, it's a long-term commitment.
Yeah.
Especially when you're told like, oh, you're not going to enjoy yourself for the first 8 hours. But trust me. You
have to get through the Mark Brandanowitz era, but trust me, once Rob Lowe and Adam Scott show up, it really becomes good. I actually like quite a bit of season 2 of Parks and Rec.
It's on the start of Parks and Rec is not that bad. I think people over-exaggerate, and I've had this discussion with people before, but I don't like when people say like just skip straight to 3. Like, no, you need the foundation of
exactly
the awkwardness of early bits of shows.
It's why I've never, like, as much as I've said, like, oh yeah, just get through, like, Breaking Bad, like, all the people I try to get to watch Breaking Bad, I'm like, yeah, the first season, it's a little bit over the top as far as, like, gratuitous violence and gore. It becomes just this really amazing, like, almost dark comedy neo-western, but you just get through the first season. But I've never been able to get through Star Wars, The Clone Wars, like, oh, it'll recontextualize the prequel era for you. You'll really like it. And I sit down to watch the first episode. I just can't. I know it gets good. I know it gets good, but I refuse to skip ahead. And anyway,
that said, yeah, you stick with this first world. It will be rewarding for past going to literally any other world. And I mean, that's not to say, like, we ragged on World 1. That's not to say there wasn't a lot in World 1 I did enjoy. Like I said in our interview with Rob, even though the conceit of this level has nothing to do with the time travel premise of the rest of the game, other than it's the result of the time machine going awry.
Mm-hmm.
I am a sucker for this level trope of playing with the scale of your main character or his surroundings. Like, I really enjoy aforementioned Toy Story 2 because of the way it plays with making giant platform levels out of these very mundane environments. I like Macro Zone in Mario Land 2. I like Tiny Huge Land in Mario 64, Giant Land in Mario 3, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And this game does have a lot of fun with turning mundanities into stuff to jump around in, and I do like that about it. And it does let the game get... I think the game is very reference-heavy and humor-heavy, like, all throughout. The pun game in this game is top-notch.
Oh, absolutely.
Like,
yeah.
rivals the best of, like, any game I can think of, really.
It actually, Cameron, it reminds me of you. Because as in my friend group, you are the one who will just sit there quietly. This is what you're known for. And everybody will be quipping. And you'll just be silent for 10 minutes. And then you will utter something that is so utterly devastating, so well constructed, that it puts all of us to shame. And yeah, so I was thinking about you, some of the pun work in here. And some of them are just, especially in, Bunny I Shrunk the Chimp, some of the jokes, some of the references, they're just simple transposing. Like, we're gonna break out the thesaurus, and we're gonna find the most legally suitable way to frame something. So it's an obvious reference, but we're not going to trample on copyright.
Yeah, you need the kind of... and I feel like you need the kind of, like... the, like, groaner, very on-the-nose puns to make the odd, really fun one stand out.
Yeah.
And just hit you like a truck.
Right.
Like, I'll just... I won't spoil every reference in this world because, like, I think people should just see them. But, How you remember earlier when I name dropped a few games that this game reminded me of, and I'm pretty confident were major inspirations to Rob specifically. That being Spyro, Gex, Toy Story 2, and Muppet Monster Adventure.
Yes.
I was pretty confident name dropping all of them because they are all very blatantly referenced in this world.
Yeah, so there are several several pieces of physical media scattered around Clive, Wrench, and Nancy's house, which you shrink down and explore. And they must be hoarders because there are multiple copies of everything. And I'm like, why do they have 6 copies of what is the Conker's Bad Fur Day parody? Plonker? Was it Plonker?
It's I think it's Plonker's Bad Breath Day.
Plonker's Bad Breath Day. There were so many copies of this, and I'm like, are they like flipping these online given the used game market? I
mean, maybe Nancy's funding her inventions that way. I don't
know. But yeah, there are numerous copies. Like, if you miss a reference here or there, you might encounter it elsewhere in the world. But were there any video game parodies you wanted to point out, like title-wise?
I just think my favorite one, and this is like a series on their shelves, like they own multiples in this, and it's just the Steely Wheelie Automobile series. It's just really fun to say. I mean, it's Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah. I didn't expect a Fleetwood Mac reference in my Clive N Wrench. I feel like this is something for Jeff and myself, the dad rock. But there is a Fleetwood Mac Rumors reference, the album Rumors, except it's called Ship Oak Nicks. So you take Fleetwood, turn it into Ship Oak, and then you take Stevie Nicks from Fleetwood Mac, and you use that as the second word. And instead of rumors, it's whispers. And it's like is it one of the Badgers with snake? Is that?
Yeah, it's a badger NPC with a snake NPC. This is a very common thread throughout like every like in-universe like product Easter egg or like poster on the wall. They'll tend to use characters who appear elsewhere in the game as like foreshadowing or a reference.
Yeah. Well, especially as Rob pointed out in our interview with him, this first world is full of references to many of the other worlds, and the time travel aspect is like this stuff already happened in the past. It does make me call into question some of the time travel mechanics of this game. Like what is actually time travel in this game? Is it stuff that's like whatever happened? Like Clive N Wrench always went back in the past, so that's always what happened, or is history actively changing around the characters?
Yeah, I don't know. The way I've rationalized it in my head is like because Dr. Dorcas is causing all of these problems as Clive, Wrench, and Nancy are actively going around trying to fix them. It's created like this weird hodgepodge.
I haven't fully. I feel like I need to beat the game to really walk away and say, well, that's what was happening. So I'm kind of like I'm only.
I've been trying to resist the urge to just plow through the whole thing before we did this podcast, if that gives you any indication of if I plan to stick with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I had to like cut myself short because I actually didn't want to have the knowledge of the end game rattling around in my head going into this episode, because I feel like with first impressions, I want to only be half informed, because part of it is the enthusiasm of having a new game rather than something I've completed and sort of tucked away to my memory banks. So I called it after World 4. I was like, all right, as much as I wanted to keep going, because World 4 is really where I got giddy, like downright giddy about the game. Like, I love Clive N Wrench, but I had to like slow myself down there. But one of the references in Bunny I Shrunk the Chimp that I would be a critical fault if I didn't mention. We already mentioned the Conker's Bad Fur Day reference, right? So this one is a little bit harder to see. You have to really be on the ball. Once you get down into the bathroom and you look at the shower products that Clive N Wrench has. So there is a brand of shampoo in the world of Clive N Wrench called Knees and Toes, Head and Shoulders, right? And Clive apparently uses carrot cake scented shampoo. Wrench uses banana scented shampoo, naturally being the monkey. But on the back of the banana shampoo, there is a little, there's a little, I guess, slogan that says, "Oh, banana."
It's something I've enjoyed generally about every kind of, anytime there's like a product or a poster or basically anything requiring a vast swath of text, like the game will go out of its way to type out the entire thing. It won't just be like some like lore ipsum nonsense or like a series of dashes. Like you will get the full marketing blurb in there, even if it's sometimes at too low resolution to make out 100%. And a lot of the times it will just be very indulgently silly, but I enjoy it every single time. I'm always like trying to position the camera enough in a way that I can read it. And I really appreciate it.
That's why I do almost feel like this world would have worked better as some sort of quasi-victory lap, because being this person who wants to soak in all of these details, it was kind of rough at the beginning of the game while I was still trying to get my my feet wet. I mean, you literally get your feet wet in the bathroom, but I was trying to really get a handle in this game, and I just wanted to stop and read everything. And the camera too. We didn't discuss the camera. There are some circumstances in the game where the camera does not cooperate fully. It's better than Super Mario 64. I'll say that much. And you can always reorient the camera, position it behind Clive N Wrench. But there are some like narrow spaces where it just fights you.
What I do appreciate, though, at least, is that you generally have Like, again, speaking of better than Mario 64, you generally have, like, pretty free reign of motion with the camera, even if it'll sometimes, like, get, like, hang on a wall in a tight space because, the game doesn't want to clip through the wall.
Yeah.
But, like, something I've particularly gotten a lot of use out of, and I feel like I haven't played too many 3D platformers that either let you do this or where I've thought to do this. In a lot of instances, you can just position the camera where it is, like, in a direct bird's eye above Clive N Wrench.
Yeah.
Like, in an almost, like, Grunty's Revenge sort of camera angle.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been surprisingly helpful, especially in World 4, where you have this very dense marketplace that is multi-tiered, and there's a lot of, like, rooftops of variable depth.
Yeah.
And trying to collect and find all the pocket watches, that was very helpful. Just being able to zoom things far, far, far beyond the eye level of Clive and Wrench and take in the whole of my surroundings.
You can also position the camera so you're essentially in first-person mode. I don't know if you've tried that.
I tried it, the actual, like, first-person look-around, but I didn't see a way to, like, move in that mode.
Oh, yeah. You can sort of move around. Like, I don't know if it's, like, precisely first person. You might have a little bit of Clive and Wrench there, but it's...
Oh, you mean when you, like, tilt the stick all the way down instead of all the way up. Basically the opposite of what I've been doing.
Yeah. So, like, I actually was running around a little bit like that.
Or all the way up rather than down because it's reversed.
Right. But yeah, I was running around like that, sort of in quasi first person mode. And you would think, like, that would be a terrible way to experience a 3D platformer. But it turns out I've actually gotten okay at that thanks to Sea of Thieves and all of the platforming that Rare incorporated into, like, some of the tall tales in that game. So I was like, oh, hey, this feels pretty familiar. This feels like I'm playing Sea of Thieves, and I'm not so bad at it. So when I get to the pirate world, I might have to bust that out. Yeah, so, yeah, like, I feel like we were, I don't know, harsher than we would like to be on the first world. There is a lot to love about it, but as the first impression, as the actual first impression that so many players will have, because even, like, the orientation, the little training hub that Nancy sets up for you, which feels a lot like the ukulele toy box, like that, it's rudimentary, and you'll get the handle on it, but the Bunny I Shrunk the Chimp world is definitely where you kind of get pushed into the deep end, literally in the case of the bathroom, and I don't feel like it's an accurate representation of the rest of the game. So it's just unfortunate that I feel like too many players are going to be broken at the altar of this first world, when the second world onward is really what Clive and Wrench is about, and then you can go back and enjoy the first world once you understand everything. Like, one of the biggest questions that I've seen come up is the way that the hub is structured, the overworld, and then the sort of world lobbies, because in Bunny I Shrunk the Chimp, it has such an enormous lobby going into it. It's so similar to Banjo-Kazooie.
Yeah, I was refreshingly surprised how much this reminded me of Banjo-Kazooie, and it kind of was one of those things that it's been so long since I've seen this done, it just kind of took me back. It's like, yeah, I haven't seen a lot of games do this outside of Banjo-Kazooie.
Yeah, so if you don't know what we're talking about, basically the world bleeds out into the overworld the closer you get to the portal to this specific time period, or in this case, the dimension in space. So, yeah, like, usually it's just going to be this small little area that's representative of the world you're about to enter. But with Bunny I Shrunk the Chimp, it's effectively a whole other room that you don't get to explore in the world itself. In this case, the bedroom.
To the point that, like, when I first entered this area not having known any, because I kept myself fairly light on watching gameplay footage of Clive and Wrench or other people's experiences. When I first walked in and saw this giant living room space, or, well, I guess bedroom space, it's got a bed in it. This giant bedroom space, because the hub is set up so that you enter Bunny I Shrunk the Chimp through a ventilation shaft.
Uh-huh.
And once you come out, and the hub is just there, and it looks like you're already in Bunny I Shrunk the Chimp. So my immediate thought was, oh, is this game going to do like the Star Fox Adventures thing where everything is just seamlessly loaded ahead of you? There's not like a like separate delineation of like level and hub. You just walk there, and no, that's not the case. This is more akin to like walking into the lobby for Treasure Trove Cove in Banjo-Kazooie and seeing the pirate ship and the giant treasure chest.
Right.
That you have to then hop into to get to the world proper.
Right, but again, since this is your first experience with it, you think, oh, I'm in the world. And then you don't realize there is a portal and you're not actually in the world yet and it hasn't actually begun. You're just still in the overworld. And so I can see how confusing it is. And then not even to get into the fact that, there's not even a boss, right? So the traditional structure of the worlds isn't really established here, so you don't really know how it's working until you get to that second world. So a lot of people are confused. But like I said, once you do attain this knowledge, it's not an issue, but it's putting a lot of people off. So
yeah, and it's funny. It became something with each subsequent world I appreciated, because visiting the totality of like the worlds I've gone through so far, it's become evident that the hub worlds are always like have some kind of trapping to them that you don't encounter in the world proper. Mm-hmm. Like they are a unique like sub area. Like the lobby for the Great Wen is a rail station.
Yeah.
And that's not anywhere else in that world. Like trains aren't really a part of that world. But it's a fun little thing to have the entrance be this rail platform.
Yeah.
With the and every hub area, at least that I've seen past the first world, has this setup where you have two entrances, one for the level itself proper and one for the boss fight.
Yeah, that took some time figuring out like what that was about. Like, oh wait, this is the boss, and the game like shows the faces of the bosses that you need to beat before you can get into that world, but it's confusing because you're like, wait, that's the Ripper. What?
Yeah, that threw me off too. Why is what's clearly the prehistoric area boss? Why is his face over the Middle Age world?
Right. So once you figure out what the game is trying to communicate, then it's pretty simple. I know the game is being bundled. Physical copies are being bundled with instruction manuals. I've not gotten my physical collector's edition yet, so maybe this is all explained in the instruction manual, and it's just like a classic game from the 90s where you really should read the instruction manual first, but that's really not how gamers are conditioned to operate now. So let's talk a little bit about World 2. The Great Wen, the Victorian London parody, sort of, that, for me, this is really where I fell in love with Clive N Wrench. Because, like I said, this is not an environment I'm used to seeing recreated in a 3D platformer. But if you love Sherlock Holmes, or you like any of the trappings from this era, steampunk or what have you, I think you're going to dig World 2. And what really, I think, pulled the world together for me was the fact that a large part of it takes place within the museum, which is just a lovely way to sort of foreshadow, or in this case, I guess, given the time travel nature, call back to all the adventures for Clive and Wrench to come.
This is something like it didn't fully dawn on me, like how brilliant this is until much, much later in the game. But the museum is like really good environmental storytelling, because like, I'll just cut right to the chase. There is a wing in the museum that is full of monuments that are an ode to all of the bosses you'll be facing.
Yeah.
That are like aligned with Daucus and kind of messing up history.
Yeah.
And it has like a short little blurb. It'll tell you their names. And it's like, I didn't even realize like what it was doing at first. And then once I started to go to these worlds, like, oh, this was meant to like give me a reason to care about these guys before I run into them.
Yeah. The game really does a good job of making the bosses matter as characters. Because so often in games like this, the boss is kind of held from your line of sight until you get to them. And here the game really wants you to know you're going to be fighting these people eventually. You're going to be encountering them. They have personalities. They have character. Get familiar with them, because they're going to be appearing either physically or in references in more worlds to come. So, it was a really good way of sort of acclimating you to the boss characters, which is a big, I think, selling point of Clive and Wrench is like so many of the NPCs are just the bosses themselves, and they're more than just obstacles. They're like fun parts of the story.
I mean, I have seen like a lot of criticism of like Clive and Wrench themselves as characters. Like, you don't really get a good read on who they are. Every single one of the bosses is extremely characterful. They have really fun designs. The game can have like kind of rough animation at times, but the bosses get like some good comedy mined out of them, and they all have very apparent personalities to them.
Right. Yeah. I see the criticism about Clive and Wrench, especially when you compare them to, say, a banjo or kazooie or even a ukulele, And yeah, I would like to really know more about what makes Clive tick. Wrench, I sort of give a pass because he's a monkey, whatever, I'm good with him. But I don't really know really what's driving Clive here, or why Nancy can't just do this herself, right?
Yeah,
like,
that was kind of my like prevailing thought after the intro cutscene, which was like, okay, it really felt to me like it's Nancy's time machine that's gone awry, and like she has stakes in this, wanting to clean up kind of the mess that she feels responsible for. She has like a wrist-mounted time travel device that, like, it's evident in some of your interactions. Like, she is kind of like, she's not just sitting idly doing nothing. She's like gathering some of the collectibles herself in the background and just like passing them along to you. And it kind of made me think, well, yeah, couldn't she just have been the main character then? Like, Wrench is even her assistant.
Yeah.
Clive just seems to be chilling on the couch when all this goes down.
Yeah.
And I don't really have a good read on him, in part because of that, and also because this is not a dialogue-less game, but there are a lot of bits of the presentation that don't have dialogue, because most of your dialogue is from hitting X to talk to other characters. And since Clive is not one of those other characters, you're not getting a whole lot of input from him.
Well, speaking of Nancy, I have to bring up one other element of her character. Well, let's say two more elements. Because
are those elements Wrench and Clive?
Yeah. So she appears in every world. She's not just like this cutscene character who then disappears for the plot. Like she is actively like within each world and the hub, but
which I do appreciate because again, like narratively, there's no reason she couldn't be helping with this.
Yeah, like maybe she just has a medical condition that prohibits her from doing like the full-on platforming, but she calls out to Clive N Wrench whenever she is nearby. And it creates the similar effect that, say, Navi from Ocarina of Time is known for, where it's just very annoying.
Yeah, I get that the like gameplay application is supposed to be similar to the Jinjos whistling for you in Banjo-Kazooie, where it's calling attention to the presence of an NPC that you may not realize is there, to navigate you toward them. The issue is she'll not only keep doing it after you've talked to her the first time, but will often start doing it at the second you start to walk away after talking to her.
Right. It's like, I got it. We just went through this. What else do you need?
Yeah, I guess on another subject with Nancy, and this is something just I felt really horrible about playing the game. So you said you were playing it on Switch, Hyle?
Yeah.
Okay, so you wouldn't have this problem, but I did ask in our DK Vine group chat if anybody playing on Xbox, or, I mean, not Xbox, excuse me, on Steam, because there is no Xbox version, on the Steam or the PlayStation versions. I assume the PlayStation versions have this as a trophy. But I posited to the group, how many of you got hitting Nancy as your first achievement in the game? Because to be clear, I did not intentionally attack Nancy. What had happened is the very first controllable bit of game is you are placed in the hub world with Nancy right in front of you to talk to kind of gesture you toward where to go next. But, you know, my first instinct in a 3D platformer the second I'm given control is to walk forward. And the game seemed to interpret just the act of physically interacting with Nancy in any way as a shove. And the achievement popped for attacking her, and I felt really shitty about it.
I don't know why that's an achievement. I of course have been playing on Switch where there are no achievements. However, the very first thing I did when I was given control in the space between time, the hub world, is I did the spinning attack right in front of Nancy. Not trying to attack her. I didn't think it would do anything. I didn't even know what I was doing at that point. I was just getting a feel for the controls, and the very first thing I did was attack, and I attacked Nancy and knocked her to the ground.
And to be clear, the achievement is called That Was Uncalled For. This game is not pro hitting people who are nothing but nice to you.
Right, yeah. This isn't a game that encourages cousin abuse, but there it is all the same. And I was like, oh, okay, like everything in the game is going to be interactable, like similar to Ukulele, like not all the characters, but, you know, being developed in Unity, you know, you can interact with everything, and everything's going to be like malleable. And no, I think Nancy's the only NPC you can really knock over that's not an enemy. Maybe I'm wrong there, but, yeah. Whoops, sorry, Nancy. Didn't mean to. Maybe this is why she can't adventure. Maybe this is why Clive has to do it for her. Because
Clive accidentally walked into her and shattered her ankle.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, maybe she's got, like, glass bones. Like, she's just extremely uncoordinated, and just brushing up against her knocks her over. So maybe, like I said, a medical condition, maybe she's just completely uncoordinated. And it has to be Clive for this very reason. I don't know. But, getting back to the Great When really quick. This is really where the full breadth of the structure of the game comes into play, because you'll have sort of like two major areas or set pieces within a world where it's in this case it's sort of the streets and the museum. The museum is just like part of the structure of it, and then you've got the underground, the sewer / like factory for Dr. Dawkins.
Yeah, I've mentioned like the again, I'm bringing up comparisons to Spyro again, but I feel like the structure of the worlds is a lot more linear than Banjo-Kazooie, similar to like the structure of a Spyro level is generally very linear. Like it has a beginning and a point A and a point B, and there will be branching paths off of that to do like little side goals.
Mm-hmm.
And Clive N Wrench is kind of like a slightly more broadened version of that, where there is definitely still a point A and a point B, but the paths will generally branch off, and there will at least be, I think, generally at least one other major interior space other than where you first enter the world.
Mm-hmm.
Interior or exterior, just like there will be at least one loading zone of additional world for you to find.
Like I said, once you really get acquainted with the primary structure of the game, then it all really starts clicking for you. And I just loved like roaming around this whole world. It was a lot of fun. It was enjoyable, and the platforming really, I think, came alive here too, where it wasn't confined to jumping up on counters and sofas and what have you. And it just felt a lot more coherent as a fan of the genre.
Yeah, there's also just a lot more owing in part due to it being like taking place in more architectural structures and like stonework. There's a lot more defined like platform edges and like traditional shapes that a 3D platforming character can interact with, like various rectangles and wedges for slopes. Like there's nothing like in the first level where you might like do like a ledge hang on a towel rack with,
right,
with the towel like kind of bumping up over it. You get like these very rigidly defined, like, no, that's clearly like a ledge to hang off of.
Yeah. And the Great When features the first boss battle of the game against Drew the Ripper. D-R-O-O, the Ripper. Who is kind of a mashup between Jack the Ripper, obviously, and a little bit of Sweeney Todd in there, because he's a barber. And it's alluded to throughout the world that he is a barber who's been killing people, because, that's what Sweeney Todd does. I didn't understand the name Drew the Ripper, though, because I didn't know what Drew was. And I was like, is that a pun I'm not getting?
Yeah, a lot of it was something I got like insecure and in my own head about playing the game, because most of the other name puns in the game are of the sort where I get the joke immediately and it's a good joke.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know a few worlds later we're going to have Vlad the Impala, and I'm still not over how just brilliant that pun is.
That's irritatingly good, right? Like,
right. But it took me a while. Like, I think I was doing the same thing you were doing, like trying to think like, is Drew like a cultural reference or a reference to a lion? Like, I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, so I was thinking that Drew must be some sort of term for like a male lion. Because, there's always these zoological terms that are very specific for a specific animal and this, like, what it is, stage of life, like a kangaroo baby is a
And I'm
Joey.
conditioned through any kind of media with, like, this is the Star Fox naming convention. Like, they have the name of what they are in their name.
Yeah.
Like, oh, Falco Lombardi, well, that's a bird.
Right.
He's not a falcon, but that's a bird.
Yeah, so I was, like, racking my brain trying to figure it out, and I just eventually gave up.
And then it dawned on me, like, again, I'm fully prepared to be told, like, no, this isn't actually what it is. Are you an idiot? But it occurred to me, Drew the Ripper, so if you flip that, his name is Ripper Drew. The first boss of the first Crash Bandicoot game is Ripper Roo. And then it kind of fell into place, like, oh, was this Rob making an indulgent Crash Bandicoot pun?
I think that has to be it, because I've searched for the term, and I can't find any reference to Drew towards lions or Victorian era serial killers. So
yeah, and it is spelled Droo, not the traditional way like a person's name Drew would be spelled.
Right. But this boss fight, this also like demonstrates how boss fights are structured, in that you actually exit the world itself, go through like the lobby of the world in the overworld, and go through another portal that takes you to this sort of arena where the boss fight happens, which it's a different structure for. I mean, it's, I guess, in some ways similar to something like Donkey Kong 64, even like the boss portals were in the worlds themselves, but it keeps it sort of cordoned off from the main platforming action. So you never have to worry, oh, I might accidentally stumble into the boss fight and I'm not mentally prepared for that yet. It's like, no, I'm ready to fight the boss. Let's go out and do it.
Yeah, it's not a structure I'm used to at all, but like I do appreciate that the boss is cordoned off from the world.
Yeah, and it allows, I think, Rob to have a little bit of creative license with the world, shows different areas that don't have to be attached to the main one. Like in this case, this one takes place out on the docks, and it's like during winter, so you know it's ice. You're fighting on like this little sort of floating like quasi iceberg.
Yeah, I've noticed the bosses will also often play with like time of day versus the level they're from. In this case, it is. In this case, it's a rainy night, which granted in the Great Wind, it's pretty dark and rainy all the time.
Right.
But I think this boss also conditions you for future fights, in that it gives you the understanding, like, these boss fights aren't necessarily going to be attacking the boss character directly.
Yeah.
You might be doing something indirect to hurt them, or some kind of challenge. And the structure of this boss is, I call it very Klonoa-y, if anybody has that frame of reference. And by that I mean, the interaction with the environment is very two-dimensional because you're walking around a ring. And the like interaction of depth is on the part of the boss itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was a good way for me to finally get acclimated with the projectile dodging that I was struggling with in the first world, where, you know, Drew the Ripper will be throwing his barber shears at you, and you're trying to get him to cut the ropes or whatever, so he hurts himself. But yeah, it was a good, like, all right, now I've got to get the hang of this. And I think my only complaint with the boss fights thus far is that sometimes when they like drain your health, it's like this immediate thing where like, oh, you're done. Like there's no death animation for Clive N Wrench. So it's just like, boom, you're out of it. And you're like, oh, did I lose all my health? Okay. It's a little jarring at times.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any kind of lives system in Clive N Wrench, but obviously you can die.
Yeah.
And yeah, the bosses just kind of abruptly restart if you lose all your health.
Yeah.
With like no pomp and circumstance.
And you will. Like you will get pummeled until you get the hang of each boss fight, because you're also trying to understand the context of how you survive the encounter and how you get them to hurt themselves or you hurt them. So,
and fortunately, they're not time consuming if you fail.
No. So, and it's just like, oh, okay, I know what I need to do. Now I need to keep at it and see how their attack structure changes, and then go from there. I mean, it's just any standard boss fight, really. But yeah, it's each one is a new experience. So, well, let's talk a little bit about the third world, Cajun Mob Bog. And in our interview with Rob, we said it was Prohibition era. I think that was a little bit of a misnomer on our part. This seems to be more 1940s, actually, or at least the era of the original Godfather movie, if all of the references and the music itself doesn't tip you off to what it's homaging, even though it takes place in a version of New Orleans.
Yeah, I didn't find myself thinking too terribly much about the time period at all in this world, because it feels like this could have just been a thing I would accept in a video game as having taken place any time.
Yeah.
Kind of like how you can just see, like, 18th century pirates in a video game and not really think about, well, those don't exist anymore.
Oh, shut your mouth. I'm sure they're out there somewhere, Cameron. Yeah, like, I'm not a mafia movie guy. I know Rob said he was, and clearly that's demonstrated here, but I've never, like, the genre, like, I've never been able to get into it. It just doesn't have any appeal to me. Like, I recognize The Godfather is this towering achievement of cinema. The Sopranos is the best TV show ever made. I just can't get into it. But I really enjoyed this world. Again, this is another aspect of that. Oh, they've never done this in a 3D platform. We've had swamp levels out the wazoo, but we've never had this weird blend of swamp level / New Orleans / mobsters.
Yeah, there's just so much, like, really, like, novel mashing up in this game, even of things that I've seen all over the place in 3D platformers.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen swamps, and, well, sometimes I've seen mobsters, too. We played Bad Fur Day.
Right.
But
right. And, you know,
it's just a very... And even then, there are swamp levels in video games that I played. I feel like it's very rare to see a Louisiana swamp.
Yeah.
In a video game.
Yeah. It's... Like, I don't...
At least a 3D platformer.
I don't know what Rare and Playtonic are always, like, aping with their swamps. Like, what is the direct inspiration there? But, yeah, I mean, for us in the United States, there's always a very clear association with, like, the wetlands of the South, the southern states. And... yeah, I mean, it was really cool to see that direct cultural connection there. And I don't really like Swamp, Bayou, whatever levels, all that much. Like, Kremke, I like, but I think the Swamp levels are still my least favorite in DKC2. There's just something about the dreary shades of green and...
I feel like swamps in video games are often, like, creepy and disgusting, and that's what is accentuated. Not so much, but Bubble Loop Swamp isn't creepy, but it is very slimy feeling. Yeah. I don't feel like that feels very emphasized in Cajun Mob Bog.
Oh, like, I think the biggest problem with Swamp Worlds, and I think this was really... crystallize in my head with Moody Maze Marsh and Ukulele, which ultimately, at the end of the day, when I was completely done with the game, I was like, yeah, that's my least favorite world. It's just a lot of green. It's just a lot of shades of green, and it becomes visually uninteresting for me. Cajun Mob Bog actually found a way to present it in a way that made it fresh and exciting.
It's got a nice town right next to it,
and even the
and a riverboat.
Yeah, and even the swamp portion of the world, it centered more around exploring the trees and the like the little structures built up around, and even the color palette is more yellow and like focused on like the sunset than it is on just here's all of this oppressive bog. And I was like, yeah, even though like even things like the draw distance, the limited draw distance in this world, like, worked in its favor of really, like, selling this humid, sweaty, sticky environment. But I never felt like my eyes were grossed out by it. So I think Rob has successfully cracked the code for making a swamp world that I find as interesting as the others. So I'm impressed. I'm really impressed. And yeah, the town is really fun. The little Italy town, trading into some cultural stereotypes here, but I mean, the mafia is what it is, right? Yeah, I really enjoyed it, like getting to scale up on the riverboat. Did you happen to keep going out on the logs until you found the Easter egg?
I did, and I've noticed there seems to be one of those Easter eggs in each level, but this was the first one I found.
Yeah. Like I found the one in orientation. It's the hardest thing to reach in orient. You have to really like go out of your way around the backside to find the Easter egg. And I found this one. That was my second Easter egg I found.
Speaking of like asking if you've found anything. I want to mention something about the character Karma Llama.
Okay, sure.
So for listeners who may not have context, the Karma Llama is a character in every world who has a scroll hidden somewhere in the world, and if you can deliver it to him, he will give you some kind of hint as to where to find something, like a collectible or a path that you may not have explored. I'm curious, Hyle, has he ever once given you a hint that actually described something you hadn't already found? Because it's kind of become like a game to me to make him completely redundant, because he has never once given me a tip that I hadn't already intuited on my own some other way.
So he has always foreshadowed something that I haven't encountered yet, because I've always found the scroll and the Karma Llama first, somehow.
Ah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's never been my situation. Like, I can completely see it, though, because, yeah, you can just chart off in your own direction and not encounter the ancient scroll or the Karma Llama. And I think the Karma Llamas are supposed to be like a tribe. I don't think there's a singular Karma Llama. I might be wrong there.
Yeah, the way that they describe themselves, it doesn't seem like a singular character either.
Yeah. So, I think...
But I think it might be just my own... Partly it was because it took me quite a long time before... I think I actually found the scroll before I even found a Karma Llama the first time around. And I found the Karma Llama as one of the last things in the Great Win.
Yeah. I think he's hiding in the park or something.
Yeah, like one of the last places you'll check if you are like entering every building you can at the start of the level, instead of making it the last thing you do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from then on, maybe I was just conditioned to think, well, before I get a hint, I want to like scour absolutely everything and see if I can figure out something on my own. And to that extent, I think I may be creating my own problem. But it is just funny that the Karma Llama has become... That is a hard name to say on a podcast. He's become like DKC1 cranky to me, where the joke with me and them is just they're chronically unhelpful.
I mean, if he was really DKC1 cranky, he would only give you advice on Bunny I Shrunk the Chimp. But I see your point, yes. I mean, I think that's the problem with anything that's not linear. Like, you're gonna encounter stuff like, oh, I already figured that out. Screw you, old man. But I haven't had that problem so far. I'm sure it will come to pass. I'm sure eventually I will do something, then find the Karma Llama or the Ancient Scroll, and I'd be like, oh, I already did that, but here you go. In the interest of being a completionist, here's your damn scroll. Goodbye. No, I think I do think with the Karma Llamas though, it's like this interesting little texture world building that, like, because there isn't a singular one as far as I'm aware, and they're just existing throughout the ages, like this ancient society that just persists. At least until, like, you know, the early 1900s. And yeah, so I kind of dig that in this world, little bit of extra layering there. But the boss of Cajun Mob Bog, I want to talk about her really quick. Baroness Somadice, which is a very obvious pun on Baron Samade, who is a spirit of death in Haitian voodoo, and was also a character in the James Bond movie Live and Let Die, appeared in Rare's GoldenEye 007.
Yeah, if you've seen Princess and the Frog and you know what the Shadow Man looks like, it's playing off of the same archetype.
Yeah. So anyway, so here's your both a Rare and a Paul McCartney and Wings reference all in one. But yeah, so And it's like I said, everything is like sort of conjoined. Everything is more than one thing. So while she is like this spirit of death in Haitian culture, she also is like running the town now, and she owns the riverboat, and there's all this like extra nuance to the character, and of course all these bosses are being supported by Dr. Dawkins during his time travel. So he's like getting allies throughout the ages, and he's giving them the means to influence their environment and have a greater degree of power, whether that is owning a riverboat or, you know, committing serial murders, I guess, in the case of Drew the Ripper. But yeah, so the fight with Baroness Somadice, whatever, takes place within the actual riverboat, which you never get to explore the interior of until the boss fight, and then I guess you're shrunken down, or she shrinks you down, or whatever. But you
yeah, it's a very surreal fight.
Yeah, because you're on the gambling table. There's like a multitude of games. I guess there's the roulette wheel there, and she's basically just sending out animated voodoo dolls in your direction, and you have to dispel them, and then she pounds the table, and the dice go flying, and
yeah, there will be one voodoo doll of the batch that looks like her, and that's how you inflict damage on her. Because again, you're not directly attacking. So far, I think any of the bosses that I've encountered so far, I don't think you actually, like, punch in the face.
Which is, honestly, a really clever way to attack a practitioner of this very, like, cartoony form of voodoo, is you attack the voodoo doll that she animates that's in her image, which is really stupid on her part. Why is she setting a voodoo doll of herself? She should be sending a voodoo doll of Clive N Wrench.
It's a very fun, I agree, it's a very fun idea of how you... hurt a boss.
Like I said, like this game is an abundance of cleverness, and you just have to stop and really appreciate it to let it wash over you. But
I think also having these like avant-garde ways of taking out a boss, it's a way to let you have more fun with them as characters, because they can be scaled in the same like universe as Clive N Wrench. They don't have to be the massive giants that banjo bosses are. Granted, in this context, the boss is giant because she has shrunken you down.
Right.
But, like, say, like, Drew the Ripper is just a guy. He's a big guy because he's a lion,
Yeah.
but he's just a guy.
He's just a guy who likes killing people. Nothing wrong with that, except the killing people part. Alright, so I want to talk about Tempest Tombs really quick, and this will be the last world we really get into. God damn, I love Tempest Tombs, Cameron. I don't know what it is about Tempest Tombs. I think it's the fact that there is an ancient Egyptian world that feels fresh. And I didn't think that was possible. I thought with all of the tropes, all of the hackneyed things that have gone back to the very dawn of video games, not just 3D platformers, but just going all the way back to, I don't even know what the first video game that would have incorporated ancient Egyptian imagery would be. But going all the way back to that.
It certainly feels very novel to play an Egypt level that feels lively and lived in rather than ruins.
I think that's it. I think it's the fact that it takes place within the era of, I mean, it's not Egypt in this world. Like all of these environments are like riffs on these civilizations or time periods, but
I mean, and they're all through like a cartoon lens. Like, this game's not going to be teaching any history lessons.
No, like I said, like as a history buff, I really appreciate it. You're not going to learn a damn thing from it, but you know, it's just fun to get the vibes of that era and the tropes. But yeah, it's fresh because you're not exploring ruins or like after the fact. Oh, here, yeah, you're in the era of, in this case, Pharaoh Cleopatra, and because of that, it feels contemporary when you're in it. It's lively, as you said. It feels bustling, like it's just got like enemies and gray aliens in it, but it feels like it's alive, and I've never really encountered that before. So, like even Gobi's Valley, which is full of denizens, it still feels like, well, this is like the ruins of a bygone civilization here. And so I think this is just a really fun twist on the concept.
Yeah, it sure is. And I can't say enough good things about that like town area.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and you know, you're gonna spend most of your time in Clive N Wrench looking for the pocket watches. Because they're the musical note or the banana equivalent in this game, and there's a lot of them in every world.
I'm curious, how reliant, if at all, have you been on the pocket watch finder?
The little radar dish that comes out of the backpack. Only when I'm really getting down to the nitty gritty, I will pull it out. And lo and behold, it's always helped me. It's always pinpointing me exactly to the direction I need to go. And it's not like it's just going to tell you where it is. You still have to kind of gauge the direction it's pointed. And the angle
it's a helpful nudge in the right direction.
Yeah. But it's actually a really useful tool. Like sometimes you're worried like it's going to be broken, but no, it's always like directly zeroing you in on where you need to go in the level to find it. And in this world in particular, like, 'cause there's so many levels and layers and little back alleys to go, and then you go, you know, you scale upwards like around the perimeter of the town, and you're just looking for all the pocket watches, but it's fun. It never feels like a grind, like, oh, I have to get all these pocket watches. Oh, it feels like you're just having like a lovely stroll through this environment, and it gives you a reason to explore every inch of it.
Yeah, it's a really nice thing. Kind of like you, I've been using it a lot, but only for like post-level cleanup when I've found like everything, and I've just kind of realized, like, well, if I spend any more time looking for the pocket watches, this is gonna be another 3 hours. So I haven't had too much trouble with the pocket watches. Sometimes I've had trouble, honestly, with the non-pocket watch collectibles. Specifically, I had some trouble finding all of the keys for the first time in this world.
Yeah, this is definitely where the difficulty starts sort of ratcheting up a little bit. And it, like, this is where I was really, like, admiring the design a little bit, because it was like, oh, I'm starting to have a little bit of trouble with this. This is awesome.
If I do have one, like, criticism, it would be that this world kind of made me feel like maybe the checkpoints should function a bit like Banjo-Tooie warp pads.
Uh-huh.
Because there is a vertical section in this world that I think is really cool. It's kind of like a very, like, Crash Bandicoot-y platform challenge, like the first of its variety that you encounter in this game, with a lot of, like, spike traps and perspective shifting camera that kind of, like, puts you in a 2D perspective to kind of circumnavigate this tower. Really cool the first time around. Kind of annoying to repeatedly climb up and down when I was looking for collectibles.
It's just prepping you for Demon Turf Tower.
But thankfully, none of the worlds are big enough that that's too huge a deal. Yeah. And upon completion of that tower, you do unlock an alternate entrance to just enter it from the top, sort of. But it did definitely, it got some ideas percolating in my head. The, like, umpteenth time I was searching for that one last key. Well,
and that's the thing. Like, the worlds are always very digestible. Like, when you first enter it always feels intimidating and imposing, but it never reaches the level of, like, a ukulele world where you're just overwhelmed because it's so enormous. These are more along the lines of Banjo-Kazooie sized worlds, which I honestly prefer. Like, I do love a good sprawling environment, but in this context, I really like how just succinct everything feels. Like, there's an abundance of stuff to look at and explore and crawl over, but it never feels like there's just too much. I will never find this collectible because there's so much square feet to cover.
And Clive's movement speed feels perfect. Like, he's not too fast, not too slow.
Yeah, exactly. And I really like the character of Pharaoh Cleopatra, which, you know, she seems to be one of the more, I don't know, she sticks in my mind more than some of the other bosses, probably because she taunted Clive N Wrench in the museum of the Great Wen. She leaves, like, this,
which is a really fun thing to do in your game with time travel, is have a character leave a note for you to find earlier.
Yeah, and I like her relationship. I don't want to spoil too much because now we're getting into sort of, like, later game stuff, but I just like her relationship with another character and how it kind of mirrors, you know, real world history. And
yeah, it's very fun.
Yeah, it's like I said, the bosses of this game, I think more than any other 3D platformer I have ever played, the bosses are a selling point unto themselves, especially not just like the boss fights, but just the way they interact with Clive N Wrench and other bosses. And it's not often that a game of this sort builds up a rogues gallery, right? Usually there's one major villain, and we love that villain, whether it's a Gruntilda or a K. Rool. But here we actually have just this, like, stable throughout time of ne'er-do-wells. And I think it's great.
And they're all very, like, succinctly established between the short intro cutscenes you get with them and also through the worlds themselves, which all have, like, traces of their impact on the world around them.
Yeah. So,
like, their various egos or how they're taking advantage of their own settings to profit.
Yeah. And it's definitely the kind of thing that will stick with you. Like, I feel like Clive N Wrench is going to be this thing that we always come back to in DK Vine, where we're talking about the lore and the relationship between the characters. I really dig it. Rob does such a fantastic job with world building, and that's just exemplified from the bosses down to the smallest details in the worlds themselves. So I couldn't be more pleased with that. There are two characters I will definitely want to discuss really quick. But before we get to that, because there's really no good point to really bring this up before we get into the DKU connections of Clive N Wrench, I want to just give a shout out really quick to the music, which we haven't discussed. The music done by Kevin Was. I assume a relation to Rob. I haven't asked, but yeah, these are.
I think it'd be even crazier if there wasn't.
Yeah, right. What a coincidence. These are really effective bops, right? Like, I have nothing bad to say about the music. I think it serves each world really well. I was laughing at just the very obvious riff on the Godfather theme in Cajun Mobbog.
Yeah, and it does a good job mashing up these genres where needed.
Yeah, definitely. I think you might not notice the music at first. Like, it's not going to be like this, stop everything and listen to this. But I think it was around World 3 where I really started paying attention. I was like, all right, the music's pretty good. And then I watched the credits, which you can pull up at any time from the menu. And I was like, okay, Kevin Was. Write that down for the show notes. All right, Cameron. Clive N Wrench, obviously we're 3D platformer fans, and that's a big reason why this game appealed to us, but the reason why DK Vine is taking up all of this real estate on Clive N Wrench is the fact that it is classified as a DKU game, and we knew this a couple years ago when Trouser from off of Yooka-Laylee, Platonic's Trouser, was promised to make an appearance in Clive N Wrench, which he does in the third world, Cajun Mobbog. And I want to talk a little bit about Trouser's appearance. Spoilers here, obviously. If you don't want to be spoiled about the machinations of how Trouser appears, what he makes you do, then don't listen to this bit. But I want to discuss his appearance and what it implies about Trouser, about the world of Clive N Wrench, and its relationship to the greater DKU. So, let me just read you Trouser's dialogue here, because he's got like one little paragraph of dialogue when you encounter him in the kind of treetop area of Cajun Mobbog, out on the bayou. He's not in Little Italy. He's up there in the nature. I'm not going to do the Trouser voice either, because I don't even know how to do the actually.
You wouldn't understand what he's actually saying.
Yeah.
If you read it like Trouser would read it.
Yeah. So he says, "Hey friends, recognize me?" That's right. The famous salesman Trouser has expanded his business empire and slithered into another dimension. See that door down there behind me? Monetized. I'll open it for you for a single twit coin. New customer discount. So, this confirms, and we already sort of knew this because this had been alluded to, I think, by Rob and Platonic. Clive N Wrench does not take place in the same universe as Yooka-Laylee. Trouser is a multiversal traveler here. And, yeah, it's DKU, because DKU doesn't refer to a literal universe. It just refers to character connections and you know. So, yes, but Trouser himself is not native to the world of Clive and Wrench. Clive and Wrench don't exist in the same dimensional space as Yooka-Laylee and presumably, the rest of the DKU. So this makes complete sense within the logic of Clive and Wrench, and I'm actually glad they went ahead and clarified this, and this isn't just some sort of crazy fanon we had to concoct, because Clive and Wrench is clearly a parallel timeline, a counter-Earth, if you will, where presumably there are no humans. Animal species evolved into the dominant life form, yet somehow still developed along culturally similar lines. So instead of saying New Orleans, we get Clive and Wrench's Nolleans. But the broad strokes of the time and the era are roughly the same. So I'm completely fine with Clive and Wrench being its own dimension, its own universe, its own timeline, whatever, its own thing. I also enjoy how the game just hand waves away Trouser traveling the multiverse for business.
Yeah, he's not going to tell you how or spend any time dwelling on it. It's just something he did.
It's very much like it reminds me of a classic Simpsons gag where it's just this like, we know this is stupid. That's the joke. Roll with it.
Yeah, there's two things I like about this. One is that Trouser's appearance is, when it was first announced, I was curious if he'd be like an optional encounter if you weren't trying for 100% completion. Running into Trouser is necessary to get into about half of Cajun Mob Bog.
Yeah.
And I love that because you gotta run into Trouser. you can't miss him.
I mean, why wouldn't you want to run into Trouser? But yeah, it's necessary to get into the bulk, the actual mob part of Cajun Mob Bog.
Yeah. The other thing I like is that this is basically exactly what was described for Yooka-Laylee pre-release when they were talking about how they could squeeze in other characters for cameos, and kind of how they did with Shovel Knight, really.
Yeah.
Where a character shows up, and the whole point is you exchange a collectible that they would normally want to them to get a reward. And yeah, he has you get a Twit coin.
Yeah,
Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Layer collectible.
I wasn't expecting a Twit coin to appear in Clive and Wrench, and yeah, it's not even a reference to the original Yooka-Laylee, it's a reference to Yooka-Laylee and Impossible Layer, the one that's not a 3D platformer, which makes it, I think, even better. The fact that it's a reference to the most recent Yooka-Laylee game, and of course, one that I hold in such high esteem. It's in my top 10 favorite games of all time. I absolutely adore the hell out of Yooka-Laylee and Impossible Layer. Doesn't get enough love. And, so I'm over the moon with that. That would be like if, Diddy Kong appeared in something and you had to collect a hero coin, a big DK coin. It was just like, yes, thank you for the reference to DKC2. I do have to question why there's a Twit coin in this universe. If Trouser just misplaced it and he's like, find me the Twit coin and I'll let you through. I'm monetizing this area now, but it's just one of those things where it's up to the fans to explain. The game doesn't have to do all of the heavy lifting for us. But yeah, I like that you mentioned Shovel Knight and Yooka-Laylee. This did feel like a very similar thing where you're kind of on this like little very minor subquest that's not in any way a relation to Clive and Wrench, just like Yooka-Laylee had to get a gem for Shovel Knight, and it just felt atypical for Yuka and Laylee, but it was nice for the Shovel Knight fans who maybe got Yooka-Laylee just because of that appearance, although Shovel Knight appears in basically everything. So, yeah, it was just like, yeah, for those who might have bought Clive and Wrench just on the promise of Trouser, the amoral salesman, appearing, here you go.
I know we talked about this before, but again, I love that it is Trouser, who is not the main character of Yooka-Laylee,
Right.
either game.
But he works, and I'm glad that Platonic and Rob went in that direction, because like I said in our interview with him, we at DK Vine appreciate character, I think, above all else, or we fetishize it, I guess. We love characters, and when you pick a character that's not the main character and you put them up on a pedestal, it makes it all the sweeter for us. So, yeah. Great job. Great job. And of course, it's I don't know if Dean Wilson recorded new audio clips or these are just repurposed from the original Yooka-Laylee, but it's Dean Wilson doing Trouser, and his voice. So, it's very authentic. So let's talk about the other thing, Cameron.
Yeah.
So, speaking of that excessively large lobby area to Bunny I Shrunk the Chimp, the one that most people think is part of the actual world itself until they stumble upon the portal, it's the bedroom. I think it's Wrench's bedroom, because it's got banana wallpaper, right?
It's got like bananas and carrots.
Okay, so
it's
maybe it's both of their bedrooms, or maybe it's conjoined bedroom. Anyway, there's so many Easter eggs in here, many of which are repeated throughout the actual world itself, and one that is not. There's a one and done Easter egg if you scale up onto the shelves, and it's a goldfish. Goldfish in a bowl. Goldfish who taps against the glass.
Yeah, this game got one up on Yooka-Laylee. This goldfish does tap the glass.
Yeah.
Doesn't do it 3 times in quick succession. Just does it once, hurts himself, and swims around a bit more.
Yeah.
Before doing it again.
So, of course, the grand question then becomes, is it Royston? And why does it matter? So, okay. So let me preface this by saying, obviously, it is a legally ambiguous goldfish that in no way reflects the rare IP Royston the Goldfish from off of Yooka-Laylee. Of course. Don't want to get the fine folks, Dinosaur Bites, or Numbskull Games in any trouble here. It's just a goldfish. Of course. It's just a goldfish. But speaking as a fan, we know what the intention is, right?
Yeah, the question is, can and should we treat this as Royston?
Yeah, so let's get into the legal ambiguity of Royston the Goldfish and why we're in this state that we're in when it comes to this character, because this is a trick that Platonic and Ed Bryan have already pulled to get Yooka-Laylee and Ed Bryan's storybook apps for Nosy Crow into the DKU. So our stance on the matter as DK Vine is that the very nature of Royston, his character, he's got 2 defining aspects. He suffers horrific fates that he somehow always rebounds from, usually centered around characters trying to eat him. And he pops up in games as an Easter egg, which, started with Grab by the Ghoulies, and it just kind of escalated from there as kind of an in-joke at Rare, and then an in-joke at Platonic. And we'd eventually decided when Platonic formed that if they would put a goldfish in the game, and eventually Ed Bryan actually designed the character of Dr. Puzz and the goldfish in her bowl. So Ed Bryan, the creator of Royston, so, we decided, well, in this case, Word of God, authorial intent, those involved with Royston's creation, like Ed Bryan, the ability to put him into games not developed by Rare, and for us, the fans, to recognize it as such, because we view Platonic as a legitimate spiritual outgrowth of Rare. And that's why Ukulele games and any Platonic Friends titles that has a character appearance, we view those as natively part of the DKU. Granted the same status as a game like Grab by the Ghoulies would have.
Yeah, it's just very convenient for our purposes that Royston is just a goldfish.
Right.
His very distinct visual trappings unique to Royston in the way that he is stylized as a goldfish. Like, this isn't even entirely consistent within Rare's games, but the Banjo-Kazooie appearance of Royston is... he doesn't have a fin on top or bottom. Just a very flat, basic fish with giant bulbous googly eyes in front. And because again, he was constructed out of very, very few polygons on the N64.
Right.
And the fish in Clive N Wrench does fit this description, as does the fish in Ukulele.
Yeah. Now Royston can take on myriad of appearances. Even within the Banjo-Kazooie series, he's kind of looked different. Between
Banjo Pilot Royston and Nuts and Bolts Royston look like no other Royston, but they're Royston.
They're Royston, yeah. Grab by the Ghoulies looks more like Banjo-Kazooie. Connect Sports Season 2 Royston looks a little bit different. Viva Pinata, he's disguised as a pinata, but he's Royston.
Yeah, notably, most appearances where he doesn't look like Royston and we count it as Royston anyway are ones that can name him either in the game itself, like Nuts and Bolts, as in-game description text, or through official Rare channels at the behest of our own pestering.
Right. Yeah. And Royston has become an in-joke, especially for those who know what makes us tick. And that's why Platonic did it. I mean, we egged them on, sure, but they did it. And to their credit, they stuck with it and made it a defining part of Dr. Puzz's appearance. So anytime Dr. Puzz appears, boom, there's Royston. But it doesn't matter because Royston already made Ukulele natively DKU. So it works out well. So Clive N Wrench would ordinarily not be given the native DKU status, because it's developed by an outside developer and it's just an appearance by Trouser. We would view it as a cameo game, right? Because like all of these indie games where Ukulele make appearances, like Brawl Out, for example, Mighty Fight Federation, we view those as cameo games. They're not natively DKU. It's still a DKU game, yes, but it's a one-off. It's an intermingling of different trees rather than a new branch growing from the main DKU trunk. So we initially had and still have Clive N Wrench classified as a cameo game. And even, you know, if we were to say, hey, this might be Royston, you know, does this have the word of God needed to say, yeah, it's Royston? Because it is, for the very first time, a game where there's a plausible Royston cameo that's not actually shepherded by one of Royston's creators or the studio that owns the character, you know, as much as he is a character. So it's a weird little position we're in at DK Vine because we have it right now classified as a cameo game. And I haven't even brought this up outside of this podcast because I don't want people to be spoiled running into this goldfish, because it's this great moment where you're like, oh my God, he did it. He did it. He pulled the ripcord. He had a goldfish. The goldfish does the thing. Oh my God. So it's a great surprise. I mean, I love that it's in there. And it's such a very much I see you kind of thing, right? Like, oh, yeah. I feel very noticed right now. Like, clearly Rob knows what makes this community tick. So, I say all this, but Playtonic does have some credits in the credit. Obviously, I mentioned like Dean Wilson voices Trouser, Daly voices Nevermore the Scarecrow. We've got like Playtonic itself credited in the credits, thanking them for facilitating Trouser. Daly did the writing for Trouser. We've got Daniel Murdoch from Playtonic also doing a voice. So, and Steve Mails also gets a credit for creating Trouser. So, does that grant this Word of God status for Royston, or does that not count? I mean, after all, Rare as a studio got a credit in Mario Kart 64 and Mario Kart Super Circuit for Donkey Kong's 3D model, but we don't consider that a Donkey Kong game. We consider it a cameo game. Why does it matter? Well, the only reason this matters is for our own bullshit. Because does Clive N Wrench have native DKU status from here on out? If any of these characters ever appear again, like if Wrench shows up, will that then be a DKU game? Or is this a one-off? I honestly don't even know, because we don't know if we can say this is Royston, especially given the nature of this game. Because the inherent nature of the plot and setting, would this be the Royston that we all know and love, or would this be a multiversal variant of Royston? A Royston who was born in this all-animal parallel history of Earth that's different from the main Earth of the Rare Archipelago. Now, I'd be inclined to say yes, but our Royston has already shown up in some outrageous places, so why couldn't he also travel the multiverse with Trouser? I mean, maybe he tagged along for some reason and then just wound up in Clive N Wrench's house. I mean, he's seemingly immortal, so he can withstand any time travel. If he time traveled with Trouser back to the 1940s, he surely, could have hung on for another 80 years or so and eventually wound up in Clive N Wrench's house and Nancy's house. So, I don't know. What do you think?
Take a breath, Hyle. Yeah, I really don't know. This is kind of out of my depth.
Yeah, and even if it was a multiversal variant of Royston, would that in fact count as a character appearance? We've often talked about if they ever rebooted, say, Star Fox, but had Crystal in it, and it was like a different timeline, well, then it would still be DKU because that's still Crystal. We're going to have to table this because I don't have a good answer. I don't have a good answer right now about what to consider this goldfish and whether or not we bump up Clive N Wrench's status. Clive N Wrench itself is DKU. Don't worry about that. But I'm more worried about what comes after, right? We got to get that sorted eventually. But for the meantime, I'm really enjoying Clive N Wrench. And any future crises about sorting games on our games page notwithstanding, Clive N Wrench, I thought I would like it. I didn't expect to dig it as much as I am. It's imperfect, yes, but it really is a game that grows on you and grows more fun with every world. And, we're both fans of 3D platformers. I'm sure most people listening to this podcast are fans of 3D platformers in one form or another. Clive N Wrench is an exhaustive, home-written love letter to 3D platformers. It's designed for people like us, specifically. Certified fans of 3D platformers. And I recognize that. I see it. I feel the love coming through every pixel of Clive N Wrench. And it was making me giddy. It's an infectious feeling. I can feel just how much Rob loves the genre. And in turn, I'm vibing off of that and feeling that love the deeper I get into the game. And it doesn't hurt that the game really starts tightening up and becoming more confident, becoming more polished, becoming just more thrilling the further you get. So it's not just, oh, this is a quirky little homemade game. Isn't that sweet? It's, oh, this is a game I'm really having fun with. And I really appreciate it. And like I said, it's not like any game we've ever talked about on DK Vine for many reasons. But just the nature of how it was made and what it represents just astounds me.
Yeah, I, like, regardless of my final thoughts on Clive N Wrench, like, I just respect the hell out of this game for existing.
Yeah.
But also, I've clearly been enjoying the game because, like I said, the only reason I'm not finishing it right the hell now is because I had to do a podcast on it.
Right. And, you know, I respect the hell out of Rob for 12 years of his life, and he did it, and it's released. I also want to give a shout out to Numbskull Games for supporting this. This is not the type of game that would normally be given such a huge platform. And the fact that they saw what we see in it, and they put it out there, like, probably knowing that it was going to get raked over the coals in some, outlets. But they still did it, and I think it's worthy of that too. Like, I can't say the game is for everyone, especially if you're too young to have ever, I guess, played and loved this genre in its infancy. If you weren't around for the glut of 3D platformers back in the 90s, then, maybe this game will feel a little bit dated or clunky at first for you. But if you are of a certain age, like the old men that Cameron and I are, if you're just a complete and utter nerd for the genre, then I feel like this is going to be like stepping back in time in the best possible way. And yes, I know it's a time travel game, but I mean, just in the sense of stepping back into your own past or the past of 3D platforming. And I honestly think that once the negative reviews die down, once they become something in our own past, then this game will still have a pretty devoted following among platformer nerds. I know we're going to keep talking about it here at DK Vine. We're going to do future episodes about it on the Kongversation. And it's just going to be a constant source of debate and critique and analyzing and lore obsessing until we're all dead and replaced by AI chatbots, which is, what the internet is quickly becoming. And then we'll eventually come back as cloned heads on robot bodies, and we'll replace the AI chatbots, and we'll talk about Clive N Wrench some more. Clive N Wrench may never be household names like the likes of Banjo and Kazooie, but I think it'll be celebrated by our cloned spiderheads well into the future.
Yeah, the future.
This has been a File 2 production.
¡Qué rico!